terrorism framing. All good? Judge ready?
Yep.
Debate is imbued with a hegemonic and heteronormative understanding of education, and that is the foundation, and the resolution is the starting point of debate. The app doesn't break out of this model. Even if they criticize it, they work within the system dominated by it, and heteronormativity operates within civil society by creating universalized consciousness, and those queers that do not meet that consciousness are made into the enemy of society in each one. Civil society is the London institute, or important male dimension structure consciousness, it's the weird layer web of symbolic codes that constitute society, collective consciousness, morality, even forming a student abstraction who is the enemy of this, like categories, more codes, divide the world of pure and uncivilized and uncivilized pollution, will speak out debate or transform to pure form, and the app perpetuates rhetoric of crisis and security. The app impacts are based on incorrect linear scenario predictions. This leads to bureaucratic compartmentalization and faulty policy analysis. The impact is systematic otherization and militarized response to the culminating war. Ahmed 12. The century hails an acceleration of interconnected crisis and instability response to interwoven injuries. Environmental systems are those diagnosis leads to the securitization, militarization, response, proliferation of conflicts. This is not essential but an invisible logical failure to interrogate structural causes. Compartmentalization made crisis are approached by separate have failed. This is assumed that these need to be secured rather than transformed. Policymakers overlook systematic obstacles. This begins with interdisciplinary exploration, evaluation leads to a praiseful approach to dire, under less reductionist and compartmentalized approach to crises. Our securitized security threats requiring militarized response to this exacerbates violence. This moves away to how to generate crisis to understand the others and confound our discourse of the culminating conflict, and democratic civility is based in racist anti-queer logic that leads to exclusion and state-sponsored violence. Only queer refusal to democracy can solve unknown 14. Civility must be used read as a code for civilize the rhetoric of campuses, space of the threat intertwined with the democratic sphere and connected with moral sex panic police justification for the pepper spray incident at the University of California was the need for protections generated as feminized victims of the masculinized threat. Civility is experienced compulsory compliance to violence, democracy intertwined with the repression, exclusion of violence. We must confront the apparatus that divide the acceptable from the unacceptable. We need to refuse the good state of civility, and heteronormativity perpetuates the elimination of the queer, yep, and forum. Process of other creates individuals that are deemed as less human based on markers of social formation such as race, class, gender, sexuality, ability, nationality. Other creates an invisible standard normalization. The process of constructing a standard used to measure desirability. Normalization becomes the instruments of power in modern society. Normalization is psychologically and material violent form of social control decided violence. Heteronormativity discourses are created through the current regimes and knowledge. Heteronormativity, the invisible center of society, quintessential for sustaining oppression, heteronormativity in all spheres of social life. Individuals living in the heteronormative regime used to learn to banish their suffering, survive by repressing their pain, identify the perpetuator as a powerful mechanism of heteronormativity, perpetuated self-social organization, and the absolute logic of security is based in the desire to control and manage that renders everything knowable and hence predictable. The static epistemology results in a static ontology of the self of politics, destroying personal agency and decision-making, reifying structural antagonisms, and culminating in limitless war and authorization. Vote nature reject the logic of the one I see. Only a radical negation can disrupt dominant epistemologies. Berg 7. Drive for certain limits of it that confines within a particular system. When grounded in truth, we witness epistemology to an ontology of violence. The two quicken the war and lead to escalation of violence. Permeates being violent is married to insecure existence. To dismiss no questioning, humans have no essence outside security conceived in an existential question. And married to war, resort to violence without constraint. This circle of reason generates tension. The emergence generate the world as distinction between friend and enemy. The existence of the other constitutes an unacceptable threat. This faces causality from discourses actions can be conceived as independent. All resources are made to across which were used normal. The desire to control has never been a condemned thousands to die. The intervention enabled the genocide, hardship, bomb, and military strategy reifies antagonisms, exchanging ontology for one being where the boundaries of the self-contained possibility provides a less destructive way of acknowledging conflict wars. The project of hegemonic forms of knowledge policy changes cannot be without seizing alternative from outside and framing in utilitarian thought by being aware presence and activating different forms of existence. This seems to hinge upon questioning as such, and this is not mere wordplay. We are at war with the entire system that makes their act meaningful. Use the battle to identify with death, queerness, and negativity in the face of politics that is only valuable through some reconciled future order. Aligning oneself with negativity is the only way to reclaim life from constant deferral to the future. Shot 9. Queers embrace the negativity, death, and futureless of life. The civilization depends on hope for a future well validated on present human activity. Queerness undermines this. Necessarily aligns up with the terrorists oppositional to the structural logic of opposition or revolutionary desire that advocates liberation from heteronormativity of future. It is co-opted by the cult of the child. We now intend our tomorrow. Queers are condemned. Queerness can never define an identity, can only ever disturb one in their refusal of the will to truth, the realms of life, of the futurelessness of desire with no telos and death, the civilization. Queer cannot remain wedded to truth for a hope for a subjective future, a position built on the ground of the graveyard. Our choices are revolution or death, and the state only has. What's that? Yeah, terrorism. The discourse of terrorist monsters rooted in the history of normativity was used to authorize deviant figures poor and right. 2. Why has monstrosity come to organize the discourse of terrorism? Glance at the language has been Latin is a monster. Absolute normality separates good from evil. The discourse marks off the figure is the opposite of the good. The terrorist monster is evil. It must be destroyed. The monster has been used for history throughout the discourse of normality. The monster is linked to the abnormal form through the elements of the human monster. Double individualities represented by double violation. The individual is to be directed to the process for training and behavior. Open to the problem of those who escape normativity, which is no longer the sovereignty of the law power that produces and quarantines the monster finds dispersal of techniques of normalization, discipline, Foucault type monster sexuality through the deployment of transgender bodies, and zero scenario for ISIS nukes, espionage, and Coity 14. ISIS remains unlikely to require and use nuclear weapons if few countries sponsor terrorism. Nuclear forensics would make it straightforward to find the source of consequences for any state-connected business would be severe. Stolen material cannot be turned into device and weaponized technologies that take years to develop. It took China 10 years, and no impact probabilities 1 in 3.5 billion, and no loose nukes, Schneider Bill 9. There's small of the terrorists could require nuclear weapon terrorists to become private officials who avoiding sting of the material could be bad. The tech would be needed. The likelihood of would be 1 in 3.5 billion. The terrorists would not likely to steal. Even Pakistan gives a bomb. Sort of different locations, nations would not give nuclear weapon to a non-state group. And counter-terrorist discourse is rooted in heteronormativity. 2. Contemporary discourse of terrorism, freedom, democracy, have frame thinking and acting within the nation state. We have sought to see how a monster, terrorist monster fact, the monster, terrorist fact, reticulated with discourse of heteronormative patriotism, mistakes, urgency, given the discourse as well as communication, debated connections, the implications by border hysteria and detention, counterterrorism discourse of deploy technology with history of the West, anxieties framing. This state attempts to order reality and create uniformity. This perpetuates violence against bodies. Scott 98. The modern state attempts to create a population standardized characteristics of the utopian continually frustrating goal of modern state is to reduce chaotic, disorderly, constantly changing social reality by opposing elite systems. The aspiration of such uniformity and order alerts to the fact that modern state tribes largely the project of internal colonization, often gloss is imperial rhetoric, civilization and mission. These tribes to shape people in the landscape to fit their techniques of observation, state activities aimed to transforming the population space and nature under the jurisdiction of the closed systems. The offer no surprise that they can be observed and controlled fictitious facts on paper are the operative facts of the court of law. The categories used by state agents or authoritarian to which much of the population must stand, and method must come first. Before the app, plan focus creates a myth of objectivity that sustains violent business as usual approach disgrace. 10. Policy debates construct issues the way the questions are posed influence the response to framing college thinking. Reframing is politically challenging as it goes against powerful groups. There's dominant conception of policy making, subjective policy making, especially with right for the interest being able to detect rational policy making states. Business as usual and excludes relevant voices. Discursive approaches assumptions the policy is a neutral. Discursive analysis reveals the underlying interests decided by policy actors. Claims that experts base solutions on judgments colored by the social interactions, and the logic of preemption triggers cyclic violence by superimposing fear of politics upon the ballot. Masami 7. Fear weakness resolve may lead to individual states you leave into action to trigger a production when you fear you turn the cause into the effect. The logic of preemption contributes to the reflex production of the threat. Truth is retroactive action grows in the effect of soul futurity becomes objective as the effect of preemptive action. Preemptors will always be right to preempt because we have objectively produced the recursive truth effect. Preemptors the producers of the world, and the affirmative call for legal reformation is just a guise of leftist legalism. The affirmative results in cooptation, subjugation, and justification for continued exclusion and oppression. Brown 2. Left legalism is term projects against themselves and rights odds are placeholders which will be occupied by those who want to occupy them. No rearrangement of social fields is intended to risk left legalistic moves are incremental. A left legalist project is not to further left's arrangement with racism, sexism, or heterosexism, but infused with politics with its own discursive forms substitute with legalistic debate. Legalism borrows from liberalism, representation law, the empty substantive element of law is detected instrument rather than politics. We should not be surprised if you go to the state with your injury and come out as a woman, or go to the state for legitimation of your gay relationship, come out as the idea of sexuality, the object of regulatory norms, or go to the state with the fear about race left and come out as a member of permanently hateable minority. This policy fails to account for the transformation of the political aims. Left legal project engaged in legalism that calls for the practice, culture, critique, and role-playing force of debaters to take on the characteristics of the government rather than approaching communication from an intersectional approach that necessarily leads to lose minority debaters that cannot take the role of the government. Pelazewski 12. Assuming identity when you speak for politically neutral when speaking of members of race, class, sexuality, nationality, or other group, they are assuming that personality rhetoric involves when they communicate the identity of foreground of the phrase constructs the message for the audience in a particular way. The range of the personality available to construct by identities which are not rhetorics can participate the way the person is influenced by the race, gender, sexuality, religion, education, class, and the app seeks to preserve the narrative of righteous America, which feeds the ego of a militaristic culture, making it stronger for redeployment later. Recruited in 13. Notions of America's affiliation and their role have become anchored in a justification of America's global hegemonic identity. It drives a militant foreign policy common sense. The U.S. Canadian American exceptionalism. These beliefs must be reproduced in the face of challenge. Energy has been re-narrated. The Vietnam War is going to accommodate within the righteous of American power. The ways the re-narration are constructed and lends to articulation of populism and militarism, support for a political project to use imperial power and policy. Foreign policy constitutes a self-other dichotomy that perpetuates an identity to be securitized from those who are violently excluded. Campbell in 98. The orientation of states or identity can be authorized. The practice essential to the production and reproduction of identity. Foreign policy is a artifact implicated in the intensification of power, contributed to the intensification of power produced by the citizen nationalism. Social identity. Foreign policy will be referring to differentiation or exclusion. Marked exclusion.
Okay. Status? Reveal?
We're gonna go for our stuff.
Okay.
Like, we're gonna say
so let's talk about this Rupert evidence, preserve the narrative of righteous America. Our affirmative is very admitting that there's currently mission failure of how the current U.S. military presence. So why aren't we in
I think you're
Like
framing.
solving
I think your framing of mission failure is problematic. You assume a mission that we can either succeed or fail at. The rhetoric of "Hey, we had a failed mission, we should step back" is only going to be replaced by a rhetoric of
Okay,
"We
so
failed
here's my
once."
question about your objectivity arguments or representation arguments. Where do you at all dispute that ISIS is dangerous, slaughtering people, has the potential for weapons, is essentially trying to expand?
We critique the notion that, first of all, you're terrorist. Sorry. We said, first of all, ISIS does not have the capability to do the things that you construct them as being able to do. Perhaps, sure, violence is occurring in the forms of certain things that ISIS is doing, but our orientation toward that should not be one of "there's a crisis, we should prevent it." It should be one of understanding the structural causes that underlie ISIS's emergence.
Okay, how does the K understand the structural cause?
The K interrogates the formation of the identities, for example, that of the terrorist, and it allows us to understand how the formation of those identities produces those violences in
What's
the first place.
necessary to be understood about ISIS?
We need to understand how those identities are formulated by the state. So when we understand ISIS as ISIS or
so
terrorist, we cannot understand how they
ISIS as
actually
something
emerge
that's
in our
not
society.
terrorist group. Suddenly
Sorry?
they're our internal link evidence seems to make the delineation that even if they're something more in a terrorist group, the best way, because of their methods, to fight them is counter-terror policies. Regardless of how we label them, is ISIS not a dangerous threat in terms of their slaughtering people and spilling over and causing regional destabilization?
ISIS is a group of people situated within their societal context which you choose to ignore and simply treat them as this group that is ISIS and this threat that is nuclear terrorism. You fail to understand the fact that these are individuals produced within their society. I'm sorry?
They're visually produced. They're the ones recording themselves killing people.
Sure, so we view that as
How
a
is that
Western
produced by
state.
the
We
US
play
security
that
state?
on Fox News and say, "Oh my God, there's a threat in the Mideast, and we must securitize and eliminate that," rather than trying to understand how those actions are produced within their own society.
Okay, so the security K, just in an abstract sense, we're shifting back our foreign policy so that there's more regional control over how counterterrorism is carried out. Why isn't this a move away from U.S. management of the world?
Because that regional control, according to your own evidence in the 1AC, is sort of
Supported,
puppeted
but
by
not
the United
led.
States. No, your evidence
That's
itself
fine.
says the United States will shape that.
Yes, please.